Well, peanuts are a great crop to grow in your garden, especially if you have kids, because most kids like peanut butter or peanuts or even both. And so we're going to put some peanuts here in our raised bed. And with us today to help us plant our peanuts is Jim Kirby. Hi, Jim.
Hi, Brenda.
Now, Jim is Professor Emeritus at the Plant and Soil Sciences Department here at OSU, and he also happens to be one of our OPGA ambassadors. And he was kind enough to come out and help us with our peanut planting, because this is one of the areas that you worked with when you were here at OSU.
For several days.
Many, many days. Well, Jim, just getting started with peanuts, and if you're putting them in the home garden, what type of soil does a peanut usually like?
Well, the peanut probably prefers sandy soil for a couple of reasons. During the pegging time, and we'll talk about pegging a little later, but when the peanut puts down a peg to form the peanut pod, it prefers sandy soil so it can penetrate the soil easier. And then at harvest time, it's much easier to get to recover the peanuts from the soil if it's a sandy soil and fairly loose.
Okay. Now, if you don't have sandy soil in your own garden, can you still go ahead and plant peanuts?
Sure, peanuts will grow in almost any soil. It's just a little more critical with the moisture. At the pegging time, when the plants start to flower, which is going to be 30 to 45 days after you plant them, during that period of time, the soil surface needs to be moist so that the peg can penetrate the soil. And then again at harvest time, you'll have to, if it's terribly dry, you may have to water a little to loosen the soil so you can recover the peanuts.
Okay. Now, speaking of the type of soil, are there any specific fertility requirements that peanuts have?
Peanuts are noted to respond to what we call residual fertility. If previous crops have been fairly well fertilized, then peanuts probably not going to require much additional fertility. Peanuts are a legume, so they can fix their own nitrogen. So ordinarily we don't worry about putting any nitrogen on the peanuts. If the soil really needs anything, it's just maybe a little starter nitrogen, which would be only 5-10 pounds per acre, which is not much.
Not much in the home garden then.
No.
Now, the other thing is, here we are at the first part of May, and we're getting ready to plant peanuts, and that's really the time that you should be planting peanuts. What's our time frame here?
Right. Peanuts in Oklahoma require about anywhere from 120 to 165 days for maturity, depending on type peanut. And so some of our peanut producers will actually try to get started in late April, but ordinarily we think of May as the ideal time. And the Spanish peanuts, which have an earlier maturity, can even be planted up into the first week in May and still generally make a crop.
Okay. Now,
excuse me, the first week of June.
Oh, first week of June. Okay.
Right.
Now, we've got a couple of different types of peanuts here, and while when they're shelled, they don't really look that different. But what are the different types of peanuts? I know you mentioned the Spanish type.
Okay, we have 4 basic market types of peanut: the Spanish, runner, large seeded Virginia, and Valencia. And what we have here today to plant is some runner and some large seeded Virginia. Large seeded Virginia is the largest peanut.
Oh, that's a lot larger.
And the runner is kind of an intermediate. Spanish is generally the smallest, and Valencia seeds are generally about the size of runners. And the Valencias are dark red in color. And a lot of people like the reds for the home garden, but we didn't happen to have seed handy for that.
We're just going to try these. Now, you were talking about runner plants, and that I guess the name would imply that the plants actually run quite a bit then?
Most of our commercial runners are pretty much a prostrate growth habit, and we do use that terminology kind of mixed, but we basically have a runner type or prostrate type, and then a bunch type or more erect growing.
Okay. So now, before we get started planting these, I think peanuts are a really interesting plant, and I bet our viewers would also like to see they're a little bit different. You know, you usually think peanuts growing under the ground, it must be part of the root, the peanut, but it's not, is it?
No, it's the fruit is formed under the ground, but the fruit actually starts on the top part of the plant. I don't know that we have flowers that are
Looks like
fresh
there's a
this
very old
morning,
one.
but we have some old flowers here. And once the flower pollinates, then a peg forms and starts growing down toward the soil. It's a geotropic effect. And the dried flower will actually be at the end of the peg here. And as the peg enters the soil, then it starts forming the peanut. And this plant has been in the greenhouse, but I'll bring it out of the pot here just to show what the you can see the nice root system on the plant here. And these are the peanuts that are forming just a couple inches under the surface, and you can see that this is actually attached to one of these pegs that came down from the top of the plant. So it's a very unique plant botanically.
That is.
And I don't know if there's any others here that show any better or not, but you can see this is a fairly new pod. You can see how white it is.
That's very interesting.
The runner plants, the more prostrate growth habit, will actually peg down all out along the branches because they're fairly much pretty close to the soil, and those pegs will enter the soil and produce fruit. The more erect growing types, only the pegs that originate near the base of the plant are able to actually penetrate the soil and form a pod. The ones that flower and form pegs higher in the plant never reach the soil, so they don't produce a pod. So on the Spanish and Valencia types and any of the bunch type growth habit, most of the peanuts will be in a cluster right at the base of the plant.
Okay, so you could actually plant those a little closer together than you would the runner types.
Right, right. The erect growth habit doesn't take up the space at the runner. So, but the rows a little closer. In some cases down to 24 inches or something like that, versus maybe 36 inches for the runners.
Okay. Well, so now we're planting here. We're getting ready to plant into our raised bed, and we have really still a pretty clayey soil. Is there anything that we can do to help our peanuts when they're trying to peg with this?
Well, the main thing is the moisture to keep it. If you want to really watch the moisture and keep it sprinkled or something so that the pegs can penetrate, that's fine. A light mulch might help in a garden situation. In commercial production, we don't use mulches because we tend to encourage some of the disease organisms if we have the mulch.
Okay, so you really keep the field pretty clean then.
Pretty clean. But if use something like the cocoa shells that they use around here, it might work pretty good in this heavier soil.
Okay. Now, as we get ready to plant, how deep should we till? Are peanuts a pretty deep rooting plant, or?
Peanuts are a legume. They have a tap root, but also additional secondary root. We generally plant them about anywhere from 1 inch to 2 inches, kind of depending on the moisture situation. If there's plenty of moisture, 1 inch, 1.5 inches is fine. If it's on the edge of being a little dry, I prefer to go on to 1.5 inches, 2 inches.
Okay, and so we would just basically, and how far apart would we want to plant our peanuts when we started?
In commercial production, we go about 3 inches, in other words, 3 or 4 plants per foot, or maybe plant 4 or 5 and hope to get 3 or 4 plants emerged. In a garden situation, we could spread those out a little bit because we're going to be watching them and taking a little more care with the plants probably than in a field situation.
Right.
The plant has a tremendous capacity to make up for the space, so we could actually put these a foot apart if we wanted to, and they would pretty well fill in, and just each plant would produce more fruit. Okay.
Well, let's go ahead and get started here. We'll go ahead and start putting some in the ground, and again about...
Let's put these about 4 inches probably in this situation,
we'll
and then if we would happen to get one that did not germinate, well, we'd still end up with the plants every 8 inches or something like that.
Okay, Jim, we got our peanuts planted, and we actually had cleaned seed, but this is some seed that's still in the pod. Can you plant them this way?
Yes, peanuts can be planted in the pod, and years ago that's the way they were planted on the farms. It just takes longer to germinate because the moisture has to penetrate all of this pod before the plant can actually imbibe enough moisture to germinate. You can plant them this way and just allow a little more time, or you could take time to shell them out, or you could just pop the seed, the pod enough that the moisture can get in a little quicker to the seed.
Okay.
So they can be planted that way, but it's just you get a quicker emergence if they're already shelled.
Okay. Now something too, these look just about like ones that we would buy and eat, but that's not the peanuts that you want to plant, is it?
No. If they're roasted already, the germination is killed.
You basically killed your peanut, haven't you?
Right. The embryo has been killed, so they need good seed that has not been heated.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, if you harvest your peanuts and dry them a little too quickly, get them a little too hot when you're drying them,
mm-hmm.
that can harm the germination also.
Okay. Now you were talking about harvesting peanuts. When do we harvest them, and how do we go about doing that?
Most of the peanuts in Oklahoma are going to be harvested in October.
Okay.
So anytime, I'd say in this central part of the state, anytime mid-October is going to be about the harvest time.
Okay.
You do not want to dig the peanuts just ahead of a freeze.
Okay.
You can get some freeze damage, which causes off flavors in the peanut. But if you, in a garden situation, if you take a spading fork and just loosen up the soil and lift the peanut plants out, most of those pods will stay with the peg and come out. And then you could, if you have good weather, you could just leave those peanuts there in the garden for a few days if you don't have a lot of bird damage or something like
mm-hmm.
that. Or as I used to do in the earlier days was fix a pole on
mm-hmm.
some kind of a base, and then just stack the peanuts on this pole.
Oh, okay.
And have the peanuts kind of out toward the outer sides, and they'll dry and cure for a few days, and then you can pick them through the winter as you want to use them or however.
Okay. Well, one last thing before we go. You had mentioned that peanuts do something interesting at night.
Yes, peanuts are kind of like the mimosa tree. The leaves will fold up
mm-hmm.
at night, and so if you'd happen to come out at night and see all the leaves on the plant just folded up tight, you might get a little worried and think the plant is sick.
But it's not.
But it's not. This is just a normal situation, and in the morning when the sun comes out, well, the leaves will open again.
Oh, great. Well, thank you for helping us with our peanuts, and we'll be excited to come back and harvest these later.
Right. Okay, thank you.
We hope you've enjoyed this classic from the Oklahoma Gardening Vault. Remember, even though these tips and techniques are timeless, there's always something new to learn in the world of gardening. By subscribing to both Oklahoma Gardening and OK Gardening Classics, you'll have access to a wealth of gardening knowledge, both classic and contemporary.